Welcome back to the channel. So my latest video on React and Django received some pretty good statistics, and this is why I've decided to make a continuation of this particular video. So in this lesson, we will learn how to send data from reactjs to Django and how to update the page in an effective way. Before we begin, just a short advertisement. If you are a beginner to Django, you can check out my Django with Tailwind CSS Udemy course. It's not for absolute beginners, so some knowledge of Python as well as the absolute basics of Django are required. If you are interested, the link with the coupon code is in the description below. Before we start to code, there are two things that I want to mention. The first one and most important is to watch the previous video on how to connect Django and React, because this video is going to be the continuation of that particular tutorial. So this is number one. Number two is that we are now going to walk through what have I done so far in the project. And as you can see over here, we have the products app. So we will be working not with the posts, but with products. And when I show you the product class, I would like you to stop the video and try to create your product serializer, your product view set, as well as register the view set in the URLs PY. So first of all, let's take a look at the settings PY file. So I'm in the backend application. And as you can see in my directory, project directory, I have backend, which is the Django application, the frontend, which is React application, and virtual environment. So as mentioned before, let's start with the settings PY. Over here, I have in the installed apps list, the products application, as well as REST framework. I also have provided Django course headers, and I have the setting course allow all origins set to true. So next, let's go to the products. Let's open up the models PY file, and here is the product class. So we have a very simple class with name, description, code, and created fields, and the code is generated automatically. We generated only once when there is no code. So when we are creating our object, and we are doing it with the use of UEID. So this is the product class. Now you can pause the video and, as mentioned before, try to create the serializer, the view set, and register the view set in the URLs PY. So I hope this wasn't a very big challenge. You can create a product serializer by inheriting from serializers.model serializer. With the use of class meta, you just need to indicate what model you are referring to. In our case, it is the product class, and you need to specify what fields you are interested in. So I listed all the fields except of created. Then let's go to the views PY, and over here we created a very simple view set. We provided the query set, which is product objects all, and we indicated that the serializer class is equal to the product serializer. Then we registered our product view set with the use of the router. Next, let's go back to core, API, URLs PY, and here we extended the main router registry with the product router registry. The URL patterns for the API have also been included in the main URLs PY file over here. In the Django administration, I created one product, so let's maybe create another one. And now let's go to the products, and as you can see right now we have two objects, test1 and test2. In the React application, I didn't do much. I've added the env file providing the API URL, as well as I went to src to main JSX, and I've commented out the React strict mode. So now let's go to app.jsx, and let's first try to fetch the data. So I'm going to remove everything from over here. I'm going to remove also this count state, and I'm going to remove the React logo, the Vite logo, and the app CSS. I'm going to keep the use state because we will need it for later. That's right. Before we fetch the data, hello world. And there we have it. All right. Let's create a variable endpoint. And this is going to be equal. I'm going to open backticks over here so I can inject the Vite URL. So I'm going to reference the env file with import meta env and then the name of the variable like this, and then /products and then / at the end. All right, so we have our endpoint, and this is very important to know that over here we are fetching the data, but also we will be sending the data as a reference to this particular endpoint, because if we go back to our backend and we will open up the products, go to API and to views.py, the view set helps us to manage the CRUD operations. So we don't need to do anything else for the CRUD operations unless we would have some special requirements. So in that case, we would have to override some methods. But in our case, we will be sending data to create new objects, and the create method by default returns serializer data with status 201 created. So in our case, we won't have to override the create method, at least not in this very basic example. Let's go back to app.jsx, and below the endpoint, this time outside of the useEffect hook, I'm going to create a function that will be responsible for fetching the data from our API. So this is going to be an async function, and I'm going to simply write now a response, which is going to be equal await, and I already installed axios. So if you haven't installed axios, just write npm I axios and then run the development server for the React app again. So I'm going to import axios from axios. All right. So const response is equal to await axios get, and we are going to provide the endpoint. Now we can also write maybe somewhere at the top console log fetching, because later I will want to reference this particular function to make a sort of an optimization, you can say. So now that we have the response, we handled our promise, we can simply get the data. So we can do it like this. Data is equal to response data, or we can destructure the data. We can pick up the data from the response like this. Of course, let's maybe console log the response and console log the data. And finally, let's return the data like this. Now below this fetch data function, I'm going to place in the useEffect hook. It got auto imported, as you can see over here. And I'm going to initially run this fetch data function like this. So with the use of useEffect hook, we are handling side effects. And in simple words, this means basically interactions with the external world, such as fetching data from the API. So I'm going to save the app.jsx, and I'm going to simply right-click, inspect. I'm going to head over to the console, and over here we have our data. And the object that you see over here is our response. So over here, as you can see, we have the data, and we have the status 200. Okay. So as the next step, let's create a state for the data. So I'm going to create products data and a setter for the products data. And this is going to be equal use state. And initially we will have an empty array. So somewhere over here, we can write set products data, and now we can display the products data. So I'm going to head over to here, and then I'm going to write products data map. We are going to iterate through this products data, and simply we will maybe do this in an unorganized list like this. All right. And over here, I'm going to display a list item. So we need to provide the key for the parent element, which is going to be the ID. And over here, we can now display the element name. So let's see if this works or not. I saved the app.jsx, and as you can see over here, we have test1 and test2. All right. And as you can see, we have fetching at the top. All right. So now we can take care of sending the data. So we will need a button. And once the button is clicked, we want to create a new object and then display it below the existing ones. Below the fetch data, I'm going to create a new function called post data, and it will also be an async function. And below we can define, first of all, some variables. We will need the name and the description because we want to create a new object, so we need to provide the name and the description. And in my case, since this is a very simple example, it's going to be a fixed name and description. So I'm going to write test X, and then the description is going to be test description or test X description, something like this. All right. So once we have the variables that we want to send, we can now create a body. So body is going to be equal, and then we will simply place in the name and the description. Description. I made a spelling mistake over here. All right. As the next step, let's send the data using axios. So we will have a response equal to await, and then axios post this time. We will pass in the endpoint as well as the body, which we are sending in order to create a new object with the name testx and the description testx description. And then we can console log the response. And then we can simply return response data like this. All right. So we have our post data, and I'm going to create a separate function, which is going to be the handler for sending data. So I'm going to call it handle send data. And this is going to be an async function because we will call over here post data. And we can write new data, which we created, is going to be equal await and then post data. Okay? And basically later we will add some logic over here. But for now, let's go to our JSX, and somewhere over here, I'm going to create a button, and I'm going to maybe give it a label click me or create data. And on click, we will refer to the handle send data. Okay, so let's save this and let's see if this will work or not. So I'm going to press create data, and let's go to the console. And as you can see, we have a confirmation that the data has been created. So over here we have the data, over here we have the object with some code, test X description, the ID, and test X. And as mentioned before, we have the status 201 created. So this comes by default with the create method of the viewset. All right. So the problem right now is that we don't see this newly created object on our page. Once we refresh it, it is over here. Perfect. But in order to see it, we need to reload the page. So I'm going to show you two things that you can do in order to update the page. One is going to be a little bit less effective, the other a little bit more effective. Let's start with the less effective method, which is a little bit simpler, you can say. So I'm going to copy this state, paste it below. I'm going to call it refresh and then set refresh. By default, let's set it to false. So whenever we send new data and create a new object, we can write if new data. Then what we want to do is to set refresh to the opposite. So we will have pref state, and then we will set it to the opposite. And this way we will re-render the page. So I'm going to save this and press create data. As you see, we don't see any updates, and this is because I forgot to do one thing, and mainly we need to set in the dependency array refresh. All right? So maybe before we do this, I'll just console log refresh over here. And then let's try it one more time, create. Okay, we see refresh. Now I'm going to remove this. And then I'm going to add refresh to the dependency array. Let's save this. And let's try it again. And now, as you can see, we have our page updated. However, now we also see that each time we are fetching the data. Okay, so we have one request to send the data and then another request to get the data. And this is not the most effective way, especially if you are dealing with large amounts of data. So yeah, what we can do is to update the data on the front end. So I'm going to maybe cut this, paste it below as a comment, and I'm going to set this as a comment and set the state as a comment. Okay, next, inside of this condition, if new data, we are going to set the product's data, but first we are going to reference the pref state or pref data. I'm going just to write pref state. And first of all, using the spread operator, inside of a new array, I'm going to spread the existing objects. Okay. So here we have our existing data, you can say, in this particular array. But then at the end, I'm going to add the new data like this. So I'm taking into a new array my old data and adding to it the newly created object. All right, so let's see if this will work. And as you can see, everything is working, but this time we don't see the fetching. So we have one request to create an object, and then we are simply updating this on the front end. So we can change this to test Z. Let's try it again. And we have test Z over here. So what you don't want to do is to place in the products data into the dependency array. Because as you can see, you will create some kind of an infinite loop, right? So let's keep this empty and just do it this way. I recommend doing it this way. If you have a different way, please share in the comments below. And yeah, I think we can finish this video over here. If you would like more videos on Django and reactjs working together, please also let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video and hope to see you guys soon.